In this lesson, we will show you how to build the grungy background that we're going to be using. When you complete this lesson, you will know how to place files in Photoshop, create a new layer that is filled with color, use color channels to select a layer's highlights, edit with layer masks in Photoshop, use some of the effects that come with Photoshop, and create different looks with blending modes. The first thing we will do is open Photoshop 2017, then hit Command-N on your Mac or Control-N on your PC to create a new document. The document size we want is 800 pixels wide by 450 pixels tall at 72 pixels per inch. And you can leave all of the other settings the same. Now click Create. If you are using an older version of Photoshop, it may just have an OK button, and that's fine because it's the same thing. Just hit OK. You may want to name the document, and if it does, just call it Background. Now let's import one of those grungy backgrounds into Photoshop. Go up to File, then choose Place Embedded. Then navigate to where you have your assets stored, and I'm going to start by choosing the one that is marked Grunge01 as my base. And the reason that I chose this one is because it has just a little bit of discoloration, but nothing really drastic, and that's why I want it as my base. As you can see, when it imports, it places the photo so that it sits proportionally. Let's grab one of the corners and hold down the Shift key to keep it constrained. And now let's drag the corner and resize it and place it the way we want it, then hit Enter. And that should work fine right there. Okay, now I want you to notice something here in the Layers panel. Do you see this little icon right here? That means that what you just imported came in as a smart layer, which allows me to go in and make changes to that layer, then save it, and not only will the changes be reflected on that layer, but also for every single instance of that smart layer that I use in this document. Furthermore, it allows you to add filters to the layer, but instead of embedding the effects of that filter in the layer, it allows you to go back later and make adjustments to them should you need to do so, and that can come in very handy at times. But for this tutorial, we don't need for this to be a smart layer, so I'm going to go over here to the layer and right-click on it, and then about halfway down, I'm going to choose Rasterize Layer. Now, it is no longer a smart layer, but just a regular Photoshop layer. And I really don't care for this shade, so I'm going to remove all of the color by making sure that the layer is selected, going up to Image, then Adjustments, and right down at the bottom choosing Desaturation. If you prefer to use hotkeys, and I really encourage you to learn as many as you can because over the long run, it will save you a load of time in your workflow, you can just click Shift-Command-U on your Mac or Shift-Control-U on your PC, and it will do the same thing. And as you can see, the layer is now grayscale. Now, in the Layers panel, click the button right next to the trash can to make a new layer. You can do the same thing by clicking Shift-Command-N or Shift-Control-N. Now, with the new layer selected, go to the menu at the top and choose Edit, and then Fill about a third of the way down. Or you can hold down Shift and hit Delete on your Mac or Shift Backspace on your PC. Whichever you do, it's going to bring up your menu to fill the layer, and in this case, why don't we just make it 50% gray? Okay, now we're going to import another grunge background using the same steps that I used before. File, Place Embedded, and then this time choose Grunge02. Resize it, place it the way you want it, and hit Enter. Again, because this is a smart layer, we will go to the Layers panel, right-click, and choose Rasterize Layer. Then as before, we will hit Shift-Command-U or Shift-Control-U to desaturate it. Now this is where it starts to get fun. Next to the Layers panel is one labeled Channels. Select the Channels panel. Now hold down your Command key on your Mac or the Control key on your PC and click the RGB channel. And as you can see, you now have what they call marching ants on the screen. That means that you've got something selected. In this case, it's just the highlights of that Grunge02 layer. Now go back to the Layers panel and turn off the eyeball next to the Grunge02 layer so that it's hidden, and select the layer that has 50% gray in it. And at the bottom of the Layers panel, click the icon that is a rectangle with a circle in it. And you have just added a layer mask. In my opinion, layer masks are some of the most powerful tools in Photoshop. As you can see, another rectangle has been added beside the layer thumbnail, and that shows us what has been masked. In very simple terms, with a layer mask, whatever part of the layer is covered by white in the mask can be seen, and whatever is covered by black is hidden. And when you're dealing with shades of gray, the darker the shade of gray, the more opaque the mask is. On the other side, obviously, the lighter the shade of gray is, the more transparent the mask is. In this case, we are dealing just with shades of gray. So if I turn off the Grunge01 layer, and that's our base layer, you can see that the gray layer has varying degrees of transparency because the lightest colors in the channel panel that I selected were gray. There were no complete white colors in them at all. And I realize this sounds terribly complicated, but as we go through all of our tutorials, you will learn more about the power of layer masks. Now let's turn the base layer back on and let's see what we can do to this. Doesn't look bad the way it is, but I want it to have a little more depth to it. So I'm going to start by going up to the fill section at the top of the layer panel and turning the fill all the way down to 0. Now this is very important. Make sure you are turning the fill down to 0, not the opacity. A lot of people have made that mistake before, me included. And what's going to happen if you turn the opacity down is that you will drive yourself nuts wondering why the next step doesn't work. So remember, you are working with fill, not opacity. And the difference is that opacity affects the entire layer. Fill only affects the color in the layer, which means that I can add effects to this layer and you will still see them. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Go down to the bottom of the Layers panel, and we're going to click the FX button and a list of effects will pop up. Choose Bevel and Emboss. For style, choose the inner bevel. For technique, chisel hard. For depth, 500%. Size, 1 pixel. Softness, 0 pixels. And as you can see, even though the color is turned down to 0%, you can still see its contours via the bevel, which gives us a little extra dimension to the layer. Now let's go back up to the Fill tab and raise it up to about, 25%, something like that, just to darken it up a little bit. Now let's click the layer marked Grunge 02 and then click the trash can down in the lower right corner and delete it because we don't need that layer anymore. Okay, we're holding down the Shift key, we're selecting both layers, and while we are continuing to hold the Shift key down, we're going to click the Folder tab at the bottom. And that will put both layers in a folder just to keep things organized. Now, double-click the folder label and rename it Background. Now with the background folder selected, hit Command or Control-J on your keyboard, and that's going to create a copy of it. Rename that group Sharpening, and then in the very top right corner of the Layers panel, click the icon with 4 horizontal lines, and that's going to bring up Layer Options. Go down about 3/4 of the way and click Convert to Smart Object. Now go up to the blending modes right beside opacity and change it from Normal to Overlay. What the blending mode section does is determine how that layer will react in relation to the layers under it. For example, what the overlay mode does is it drops out all of the shades that are right around 50% gray for that layer. The closer or farther away from 50% gray the color is determines its opacity. One that is close to the overlay mode, but it's a little more subtle, is the soft light mode. By the way, just a couple of others you may want to try at some point is the multiply mode, which drops out all whites. We'll be doing that later on. Another handy one is the screen mode, and that drops out all the blacks. But for now, let's just stick with overlay. Already, you can see what a difference this makes, but let's push it just a little bit more. With the sharpening layer selected, go to Filter, Other, and High Pass, and set the radius to about 8.5. And this is about done, but let's do one more thing just to make it look a little more grungy. Add another layer by clicking the New Layer icon beside the trash can on the Layers panel. Now, fill that layer by holding down the Shift key and hitting Delete on your Mac or Shift Backspace on your PC. Now your fill menu is going to pop up, and the default will probably be 50% gray since that was the last thing you used, so just hit OK. Now this is very important. Hit D on your keyboard. What that just did was reset your foreground and background colors to the default of black and white, which is what you want for this next step. Go to the top menu, and under Filter, select Render and Clouds. The reason that you reset your foreground and background to black and white is because whatever the foreground and background colors are is what Photoshop will use to make the clouds. In this case, we just wanted black and white, so now we're going to go to the top of the Layers panel with that layer selected, and we will change the blending mode from Normal to Multiply. And remember what I said earlier? Multiply drops out all of the white shades, so all you are left with is the black from those clouds. Of course, this is a little bit heavy-handed, just it's way too dark, so we want to set the opacity on this to about 30%. Final thing we will do is go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and select the 4th icon from the left. That's the one that looks like a circle that has been divided in two. Those are your adjustment layers, yet another wonderful way of non-destructive editing. When you add an adjustment layer, all of the layers under it will be affected by what you tell it to do, unless you tell it to do otherwise. In this case, We're going to choose a Curves Adjustment layer, and under the Presets drop-down, let's choose Strong Contrast. We will select all of the layers, hold down Shift, click on the folder icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, and that's going to move everything into one folder, and we will double-click the name and rename it Background Final. Now let's save it in our Assets folder with the name of Background, and that is how you create the background in Photoshop. In our next tutorial, we're going to look on how to make the title look so beat up and distressed.